Hello, welcome to the Last Supper of Outcasts, and I'm your host, Janet Yellen. Today is Sunday, August 16th, 2026. Not that it matters. Here is today's quote of the day. The law is guilty of the evils it is supposed to punish. And there you have it. There's our quote of the day by Frederick Bastiat. Today I'm going to talk about my experiences working in real estate lending, mortgage servicing, retail banking, collections, and the such. Most of my career has been in that field. So it's going to be a series, and this is part one of this banking cartel series. Much to my chagrin, most of my career has been in some form of banking or finance, real estate lending, mortgage servicing, retail banking, collections, etc., etc. Let's just say, in those storied days of my banking career, I didn't know I was serving the devil himself. Today, my opinion is that banking and finance are at the forefront and are the epitome of fraud and corruption. To me, the banks, the insurance companies, and lending agencies are the absolute apex of fraud and corruption in America and probably the world. In fact, I believe the banks, the insurance companies, and lending agencies are the mentors to many other industries and corporations on how to go about defrauding an unwitting population and get away with it. I think they're the teachers. They're the mentors. Congratulations on how to rob the public for dummies. In this channel, I make it a point to speak from my lived experiences and not from something I heard, and not simply from something I read, but from my actual lived experiences, and why I believe what I'm saying is true, because I experienced it. It's pretty simple. This is a short example of why I think the world of finance and banking, as we've been taught it, if you've been taught it at all, is mostly bullshit. To be honest, they don't want you to know anything about this stuff because it's easier to rob you if you don't know anything about it. When I first stepped into my first loan originator role, I didn't know anything other than what I learned in order to get the actual loan originator license, which is identical to nothing. I just listened to my manager and parroted what he told me. And this guy was a good salesman. And for those of you that don't know, a loan originator or loan officer, it's not as complicated as it sounds. It really is nothing more than a sales job. In this case, I was selling residential real estate mortgages. And in order to do this job, you didn't have to understand a thing about what you're selling in order to sell mortgages. You didn't need to know anything. And this idea that the person that's selling you the mortgage probably doesn't know shit from Shinola should frighten everybody involved, seeing that a mortgage is probably the largest debt a family or individual will ever hold in their entire lives. And just some examples of the things I parroted from my mortgage sales manager were statements like, home values are only going to increase. False. And just please remember, in these particular examples, keep in mind I'm speaking of a time 6 or so years prior to the GFC, or as most of us lovingly like to call it, the great financial crisis. Another tactic in my mortgage career was to always, and I mean always, sell fear. I mean, if you're going to be in sales, just that alone, that idea alone, is probably the main sales tactic. Always sell fear. And I'm not telling, and this is just me explaining why I feel like the banking cartel is a cartel, and it's a criminal institution, because these are the things they're telling us to do. This isn't something I made up out of my own because I wanted to do it. It's what I was told to do. Always sell fear. The fear of missing out, the fear you might not get in, the fear you might not get this low of a payment unless you act now. The fear that if you don't act now and are trying to refinance a property, you could lose the house, or you could lose the low interest rate. The fear of if you are buying a property, somebody else might snatch it up on you if you don't act now. All false statements, all fear mongering. The whole banking industry as a whole, no matter what part you're in, thrives on fear and non-disclosure. That's what makes that world go around. I don't care what anybody says. False statements and non-disclosure, as I already said, were and still are the name of the game in selling real estate loans to an unwitting and, in many cases, a desperate public. And in fact, the more desperate the public is, the better for sales of anything. Desperation is a wonderful thing to play on if you're trying to sell somebody what they're desperate for. It's a piggish game, honestly. Pigs play in this level. That's why I don't do it anymore. In essence, the whole business thrives on non-disclosure, or counting on people not reading required disclosures, and in many cases, deliberately not giving the people enough time to read and thoroughly understand the required federal disclosures. I had this happen too when I was involved in that industry. We would deliberately send out the documents to the borrower. They had a 3-day rescission period. The documents wouldn't get to them until like the last hour of the rescission period, so they had no way in hell of reading them. And I didn't know what was going on. I was just an idiot. And that's what these banks do. They hire idiots and people that don't know what's going on to sell this stuff. And then, a lot of times these people won't realize they're being the salespeople themselves or whatever will either buy into it or they won't. I didn't buy into it. I knew it was bullshit and I want no part of it. I didn't give a shit how much money I could make. And believe me, it was obscene amounts of money. and this whole experience is what convinced me that the whole of Wall Street thrives on non-disclosure, unnecessarily complicated documentation, and flat-out corruption and fraud. There's nothing more or less to Wall Street. Corruption and fraud, nothing more or less. Without fraud, I'm convinced the entirety of the financial markets would collapse within an hour. Another indicator that I was involved in a highly shady career at this time when I was selling residential real estate loans was that many times I would find myself working elbow to elbow with recently released felons and flat-out criminals. Criminals look for money, and this was a great career to go into. So the criminals aren't stupid. Let's put it that way. And I remember working in a brokerage where the loan officers or the recent felons, the recently released felons, would not only say, but they would yell across the room so everybody could hear things like, for instance, don't worry if the income doesn't qualify on a potential borrower's W-2 in this case. Don't worry if the income doesn't qualify. We'll just Photoshop the W-2 so the potential borrower does qualify. Wonderful. This all for a loan the potential borrower didn't have a prayer of ever paying back consistently for any number of months, let alone for 30 years. Think about what I'm saying. And still, all the so-called experts and authorities and regulators, such as Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch Ratings, claim they didn't see this recession coming. Bullshit. The great financial crisis was, to me, and I'm not wrong, nothing more than another manufactured heist to steal money from the public to prop up an already unstable and wobbling banking cartel. The banking cartel is consistently wobbly and unstable. That's why they're continuously robbing all of us. The recent health scare was another massive robbery, and the criminals in charge are gearing up to hold us all up again. And this time, it's going to be on the most epic scales, the most epic of scales yet. I'm not wrong. I promise you I'm not wrong. And all of what I just described it's one small example of my experience working in finance and banking. And believe me, I have many more that demonstrate just the maggots that are involved in this industry. I have too much to explore, so I've decided to split this topic into several episodes, and this is part 1. And I'll leave you with this. Remember when Capital One had it was a very pervasive advertising campaign called "What's in Your Wallet?" And it would have Vikings and these ominous-looking characters with axes and like they're gonna cut your head off if you didn't tell them. Well, guess what? Capital One wasn't kidding. They weren't kidding. Capital One really was gonna cut your head off if you didn't tell them what was in your wallet, because they want to steal it. And they have stolen it, and they're stealing it right now as I'm speaking to you. So there's a pleasant little thought to leave you with. And again, these are my own experiences, my own witnessing into the reality of what we're all dealing with. People think that this kind of thing, these things don't affect us. It affects every one of us. And this is how the whole world is run. I'm convinced. The whole thing is a fraud from start to finish. So I hope you got something out of the video. Thank you for watching. Anybody that's out there that's watching, please like the video. Please subscribe to the channel. And I would love if you left a comment on any experiences you may have had in this industry. And that's it for now. I'll talk to you soon. I hope you have a wonderful night. And we'll be talking to you real soon. Thanks again.